The moment Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell walked into that briefing room, she knew the real battle wouldn't be fought on enemy soil. It would be fought right there, against the very people she was supposed to lead. What happened next would either destroy her career or prove that respect isn't given based on gender, age, or assumptions. It's earned through courage, intelligence, and the willingness to stand your ground when everyone else tells you to back down. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform one final time before entering the briefing room. At 28, she had already distinguished herself through 2 combat deployments and a master's degree in strategic operations. But she knew that none of that mattered to the men who were about to meet their new commanding officer. Her promotion had come through faster than anyone expected, and she could feel the weight of skeptical eyes even before she opened the door. The room fell silent as she entered. 12 seasoned officers sat around a rectangular table, their faces ranging from curious to openly dismissive. At the head of the table sat Captain Robert Hayes, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. He was known throughout the base for his old-school approach to military hierarchy and his particular views about women in combat positions. His grey moustache twitched slightly as he looked up from his papers, his pale blue eyes scanning Sarah with the kind of assessment usually reserved for equipment inspections. Sarah moved to the front of the room with measured steps, placing her briefcase on the desk with a controlled precision that revealed nothing of the nervous energy coursing through her veins. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, running through scenarios in her mind, practicing responses to every possible challenge. But nothing could fully prepare someone for the reality of facing down a room full of skeptical military veterans who clearly believed she didn't belong there. Captain Hayes leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his broad chest. The silence stretched uncomfortably as he made no effort to stand or acknowledge her rank. Several other officers followed his lead, remaining seated when military protocol clearly dictated they should rise for a superior officer. Sarah felt the familiar burn of indignation in her chest, but her expression remained perfectly neutral. She had learned early in her career that emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially not in moments like this. The briefing was scheduled to cover the upcoming joint training exercise with Allied forces, a complex operation that would test inter-service coordination and tactical flexibility. Sarah had spent countless hours studying the terrain maps, weather patterns, and strategic objectives. She knew every detail of the mission down to the backup contingency plans, but she also knew that her expertise would mean nothing if she couldn't first establish her authority in this room. Major Thompson, a burly man with graying temples, shifted in his seat and exchanged a meaningful glance with Captain Hayes. The unspoken communication was clear to everyone present. They had already decided among themselves how this meeting would go, and Sarah's actual qualifications were irrelevant to their predetermined conclusions. She could feel the collective resistance in the room like a physical force, pushing against her presence and challenging her right to be there. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder containing the mission details. Her movements were deliberate and confident, each gesture carefully calculated to project authority without appearing aggressive. She had learned from watching other successful officers that leadership was often a performance, and she was determined to give the performance of her lifetime. The stakes were too high for anything less than perfection. Captain Hayes finally spoke, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who had spent decades shouting orders across training grounds. "Well, Lieutenant Commander, I suppose you're here to tell us how to do our jobs?" His words were technically respectful, but the tone carried an unmistakable edge of condescension. Several officers around the table smirked at his comment, their amusement barely concealed. Sarah met his gaze directly, her green eyes steady and unwavering. "I'm here to ensure this training exercise achieves its objectives and that our personnel return safely with enhanced skills and improved coordination capabilities." Her voice was clear and professional, carrying just enough volume to reach every corner of the room without seeming forced. She had practiced this tone in front of mirrors until it became second nature. The response clearly wasn't what Captain Hayes expected. He had likely anticipated either defensive anger or nervous compliance, but Sarah's calm professionalism seemed to catch him off guard. His moustache twitched again as he processed her words, looking for some weakness he could exploit. The other officers watched this exchange with keen interest, sensing the underlying tension that would define the entire operation. Colonel Martinez, one of the few officers who had stood when she entered, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should review the mission parameters." His attempt to redirect the conversation was well-intentioned, but Sarah knew that avoiding this confrontation would only postpone the inevitable. She needed to address the elephant in the room before they could move forward with any meaningful discussion. Sarah nodded to Colonel Martinez, but kept her attention focused on Captain Hayes. Before we discuss the mission specifics, I want to address something that seems to be creating unnecessary tension in this room. Her words cut through the air like a blade, causing several officers to sit up straighter in their chairs. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as everyone realized they were about to witness something significant. Captain Hayes raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from casual dismissal to active interest. "And what might that be, Lieutenant Commander?" The way he emphasized her rank made it clear he considered her promotion either undeserved or temporary. His tone suggested he was used to intimidating junior officers into backing down, and he fully expected the same result here. Sarah took a step forward, her posture straightening to her full height. At 5 feet C, she wasn't physically imposing, but her presence seemed to fill the room. There appears to be some confusion about the chain of command for this operation. Her voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable steel beneath the surface that hadn't been there moments before. Every person in the room could sense the shift in dynamics. The silence that followed was deafening. Captain Hayes's face began to redden slightly, though whether from anger or embarrassment was unclear. He had spent his entire career in environments where his authority went unquestioned, where junior officers deferred to his experience and seniority regardless of rank structure. This direct challenge to his assumed position was unprecedented in his experience. Major Thompson decided to jump into the fray, his loyalty to Captain Hayes overriding his respect for proper protocol. "With all due respect, ma'am, Captain Hayes has been running operations like this since before you graduated from the academy." His comment was meant to sound supportive of his colleague, but it came across as openly insubordinate to anyone familiar with military hierarchy. Sarah turned her attention to Major Thompson, her expression remaining perfectly composed despite the blatant disrespect. "Major Thompson, your respect for Captain Hayes' experience is noted and appropriate. However, experience doesn't alter the organizational structure that governs this operation." Her response was measured and professional, but it carried an unmistakable warning that further challenges would not be tolerated. The room was now charged with tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Every officer present understood they were witnessing a defining moment that would establish the tone for the entire training exercise. Some looked uncomfortable with the confrontation, while others seemed eager to see how far their colleagues would push this challenge to Sarah's authority. Captain Hayes stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with deliberate emphasis. At 6 feet 2 inches, he towered over Sarah, and his body language was clearly intended to intimidate. "Listen here, Lieutenant Commander," he began, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that somehow managed to fill the entire room. "I've been doing this job since you were in elementary school. I don't need some fresh-faced officer telling me how to run my operations." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Every person in the room held their breath, waiting to see how Sarah would respond to such a direct and personal attack on her qualifications and authority. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire career, the test that would determine whether she could truly lead or whether she would crumble under pressure. Sarah looked up at Captain Hayes without stepping back or showing any sign of intimidation. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried absolute conviction. "Captain Hayes, I need you to sit down." The request was spoken softly, but there was something in her tone that made it clear this wasn't really a request at all. The authority in her voice seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, a place where doubt and fear had no power. Captain Hayes laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Why don't you run along and let the adults handle this?" His use of the condescending term was calculated to humiliate her in front of the other officers, to reduce her from a commanding officer to a little girl playing dress-up in daddy's uniform. What happened next would be remembered and retold throughout the base for years to come. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, something that made every seasoned military officer in the room suddenly pay very close attention. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential energy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Sarah's voice, when she spoke again, carried a quality that made strong men reconsider their life choices. "Captain Hayes, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen very carefully." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room like morning fog. "This is not a discussion, and this is not a negotiation. You will sit down, you will follow proper protocol, and you will treat this briefing with the professionalism expected of an officer in the United States military." The transformation was remarkable. In the space of a few sentences, Sarah had gone from appearing young and uncertain to projecting an authority that seemed to dwarf everyone else in the room. Captain Hayes found himself actually taking a step backward, his confident smirk faltering for the first time since she had entered the room. But years of habit and ingrained attitudes don't disappear easily. Captain Hayes recovered quickly from his moment of uncertainty, his face hardening into an expression of pure defiance. Or what, Lieutenant Commander? You'll write me up? You'll have me transferred? His voice was full of mocking laughter. But there was something forced about it now, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as everyone else. Sarah looked around the room, making eye contact with each officer present. When she spoke, her words were addressed to everyone, but her message was crystal clear. Gentlemen, let me clarify something that seems to have been forgotten in this room. Regardless of your personal opinions about my age, my gender, or my experience, there is one fact that is not open for debate or discussion. The pause that followed seemed to last forever. Every man in the room was focused entirely on her, waiting for words that would either establish her credibility once and for all, or destroy it completely. The weight of her entire career balanced on this single moment, and everyone present understood the stakes involved. Captain Hayes crossed his arms again, his stance radiating defiance and contempt. And what fact is that, Lieutenant Commander? His emphasis on her rank had become almost a sneer, as if the title itself was some kind of joke they were all supposed to be in on. Sarah's response would echo through military academies for decades to come, becoming the stuff of legend among officers who understood what real leadership looked like under pressure. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried the weight of absolute authority when she said the words that would change everything in that room. Everyone here answers to me. The words fell like hammer blows in the silence that followed. Sarah's declaration wasn't shouted or emphasized with dramatic flourish. It was simply stated as an indisputable fact, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted their right to command. The effect was immediate and profound. Captain Hayes' face went through a series of color changes, from red to purple to an almost ashen gray as the full implications of her words sank in. He had spent so much time focusing on her age and gender that he had somehow lost sight of the most fundamental aspect of military structure. Rank supersedes everything else. Lieutenant Commander outranked Captain, and that simple fact rendered all of his posturing and challenges meaningless. Major Thompson's mouth fell open slightly as he realized his own position in this hierarchy. He had been so busy supporting what he perceived as Captain Hayes' natural authority that he had forgotten the basic principles drummed into every military officer from day one of basic training. The embarrassment was written across his face as clearly as if someone had painted it there. Colonel Martinez, who had remained largely quiet during the confrontation, allowed himself a small smile. He had seen this kind of thing before, though rarely handled with such precision and control. Young officers often either backed down from confrontation or escalated it into shouting matches that served no one. Sarah had done neither, instead choosing to let military protocol and structure do the heavy lifting for her. Lieutenant Parker, one of the younger officers present, looked around the room with barely concealed amazement. He had been dreading this assignment, expecting weeks of tension and conflict between the established power structure and their new commanding officer. Instead, he was witnessing a masterclass in leadership that would influence his own career for years to come. Sarah allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for her words to fully register with everyone present, then continued in the same calm, professional tone. Now that we've established the command structure, let's move on to the matter at hand. She opened her folder and pulled out several detailed maps, spreading them across the table with practiced efficiency. The joint training exercise begins in 72 hours, and there are several critical issues we need to address. Captain Hayes remained standing, though his defiant posture had deflated considerably. He looked around the room as if searching for support, but found only carefully neutral expressions and averted gazes. The other officers had quickly recognized which way the wind was blowing and adjusted their attitudes accordingly. Military survival often depended on reading situations correctly and adapting quickly. Sarah began outlining the exercise parameters with the same confidence she had displayed during the confrontation, but now that confidence was directed toward productive goals rather than establishing dominance. Intelligence reports indicate that weather conditions will be challenging throughout the exercise period. We're looking at possible thunderstorms on days 2 and 3, with visibility dropping to near zero during certain periods. She pointed to specific locations on the map as she spoke, her finger tracing routes and marking strategic positions with the precision of someone who had studied every detail thoroughly. Communication will be critical during these weather events. Captain Hayes, your unit will be responsible for maintaining radio contact with Allied forces during the storm periods. The assignment was delivered matter-of-factly, without any hint of vindictiveness or triumph. Sarah was offering Captain Hayes an opportunity to demonstrate his expertise and value to the operation, despite his earlier behavior. It was a gesture that every experienced military officer in the room recognized and respected. She was showing them that her leadership style was based on mission success rather than personal grudges. Captain Hayes finally sat down, his movements stiff and reluctant but undeniably compliant. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, the words seeming to cost him considerable effort. The transformation from his earlier arrogance was striking, and several officers exchanged subtle glances of recognition. They had all been in similar situations at various points in their careers, and they understood the difficulty of swallowing one's pride for the greater good. Sarah continued with the briefing as if nothing unusual had occurred, discussing logistical challenges, coordination requirements, and safety protocols with thoroughness and clarity. Her presentation revealed the depth of her preparation and her genuine understanding of the complexities involved in the operation. As she spoke, even the most skeptical officers began to appreciate the level of thought and planning she had invested in ensuring the exercise's success. Major Thompson found himself taking notes, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by grudging respect for her attention to detail. She was covering contingencies he hadn't even considered, addressing potential problems before they could develop into serious issues. His years of experience told him that this level of preparation typically came from officers who had learned hard lessons in real operational environments. The briefing continued for another hour, with Sarah fielding questions and incorporating suggestions from the assembled officers. She demonstrated a remarkable ability to listen to input while maintaining control of the discussion, a balance that many senior officers struggled to achieve throughout their entire careers. When Captain Hayes offered a tactical suggestion based on his experience with similar exercises, she acknowledged his expertise and incorporated his ideas into the overall plan. Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who had been observing quietly from the back of the room, was particularly impressed by Sarah's handling of the interpersonal dynamics. She had established her authority without humiliating anyone, corrected inappropriate behavior without creating lasting resentment, and redirected negative energy toward productive outcomes. These were advanced leadership skills that typically took decades to develop. As the briefing wound down, Sarah distributed detailed assignment sheets to each officer present. Every document was professionally prepared and specifically tailored to each unit's capabilities and responsibilities. The level of organization was impressive even by military standards, where attention to detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Captain Hayes accepted his assignment packet without comment, though his earlier hostility had clearly been replaced by something approaching professional respect. He began reviewing the documents immediately, his experienced eye scanning for potential problems or oversights. Despite his personal feelings about the situation, his professional instincts compelled him to ensure his unit would be properly prepared for their assigned tasks. Sarah wrapped up the formal portion of the briefing with a final overview of the timeline and coordination requirements. Questions or concerns should be directed to me immediately. I want any potential issues identified and addressed before we begin field operations. Her tone was businesslike but approachable, making it clear that she valued input from her subordinates while maintaining ultimate responsibility for decisions. The officers began filing out of the room, their conversations subdued but focused on operational details rather than personal grievances. The transformation in atmosphere was remarkable, shifting from hostile confrontation to professional collaboration in the span of a single meeting. Several of the younger officers looked back at Sarah with expressions of admiration and respect that hadn't been present when they first entered the room. Captain Hayes lingered after the others had left, his face showing signs of internal struggle. Sarah continued organizing her materials, giving him space to process what had occurred, without forcing immediate conversation. She understood that his pride had taken a significant blow, and pushing too hard too fast could undo the progress they had made. Finally, Captain Hayes cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, his voice lacking its earlier edge. "I may have been inappropriate in my initial response to your authority." The words came slowly, as if each one required considerable effort to produce. For a man accustomed to being in charge, admitting error was foreign territory. Sarah looked up from her papers, her expression neutral but attentive. "I appreciate your acknowledgement, Captain. What matters now is moving forward effectively." Her response was gracious without being condescending, accepting his olive branch while making it clear that past behavior would be judged by future actions rather than just words. Captain Hayes nodded slowly, understanding the subtext of her response. "My unit will be ready for the exercise. You can count on that." The promise was delivered with sincerity, and Sarah recognized it as a genuine commitment rather than empty politeness. Military officers of his caliber didn't make casual promises about operational readiness. After Captain Hayes left, Sarah remained in the empty briefing room for several minutes, allowing herself to process what had just occurred. The confrontation had been more intense than she had anticipated, but the outcome was better than she had dared hope. She had established her authority without making permanent enemies, a crucial achievement for any commanding officer. The next 72 hours would be critical for cementing her position and proving that her confidence in the briefing room could translate into effective leadership in the field. The exercise itself would present numerous challenges, both tactical and interpersonal, that would test every lesson she had learned throughout her military career. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction at having cleared the first and perhaps most difficult hurdle. Colonel Martinez knocked on the doorframe, interrupting her thoughts. "Impressive handling in there, Lieutenant Commander. I've seen similar situations go very badly." His comment was meant as both compliment and warning. Military hierarchies were fragile things, and the damage from poorly managed confrontations could last for years. Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave. "Thank you, Colonel. I think we'll work well together." Her response was confident but not overconfident, acknowledging both the success and the challenges that lay ahead. The real test would come when they moved from conference rooms to actual field operations, where theoretical authority would need to translate into practical leadership under stress. As she walked back to her office, Sarah reflected on the lessons of the morning. Military leadership was about much more than giving orders and expecting compliance. It required understanding human nature, managing egos, and finding ways to channel individual talents toward collective goals. The confrontation with Captain Hayes had been inevitable, but the way she handled it would influence every interaction with her subordinates for the duration of her command. The exercise ahead would present numerous opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities and build on the foundation established in that briefing room. But for now, she had achieved something significant. She had earned the right to lead, not because of her rank alone, but because she had proven she deserved it. In military circles, that distinction made all the difference in the world. The rain began falling at exactly 0400 hours on the second day of the exercise, just as the weather reports had predicted. Sarah stood in the command tent, watching the displays that tracked the positions of 12 different units spread across 40 square miles of challenging terrain. The steady drumming of rain on canvas provided a constant backdrop to the radio chatter and operational updates flowing through the communications center. Captain Hayes' voice crackled through the radio, professional and clear despite the deteriorating conditions. "Command, this is Bravo 6. Weather is affecting visibility as expected. Requesting permission to alter route to avoid the creek crossing." His tone carried none of the hostility from their initial meeting, replaced by the crisp efficiency of an experienced field commander dealing with tactical realities. Sarah studied the terrain map, noting the alternative routes and their tactical implications. The creek crossing had been a calculated risk from the beginning.
"Acceptable under normal conditions, but potentially dangerous during heavy rain."
Captain Hayes was demonstrating exactly the kind of field judgment that had earned his reputation, regardless of their personal conflicts. "Bravo 6, command. Permission granted for route alteration. Report your new estimated arrival time at Checkpoint Charlie." Sarah's response was immediate and decisive, showing trust in Captain Hayes' assessment while maintaining oversight of the overall operation. The other officers in the command tent noticed her quick decision-making and the respect she showed for field commander's expertise. Major Thompson's unit was encountering different challenges on the eastern flank. His voice came through the communications system with barely controlled frustration. "Command Alpha 3. We've got mechanical problems with 2 vehicles. Requesting maintenance support at grid reference 774291. The request was straightforward, but Sarah could hear the underlying concern about falling behind schedule. The maintenance issue presented a complex problem that would test her ability to balance competing priorities. Sending support to Major Thompson would delay other operations, but leaving his unit stranded would compromise the entire exercise. Sarah considered her options while monitoring the positions of other units that might be affected by her decision. Lieutenant Colonel Williams approached Sarah with a suggested solution. "Lieutenant Commander, we could redirect the engineering support from Checkpoint Delta. They're ahead of schedule and could reach Alpha 3 within 30 minutes. His recommendation was sound tactically, but it would require coordinating with Allied forces who had their own operational priorities. Sarah nodded, appreciating both the suggestion and the collaborative approach. "Make it happen, Colonel. And coordinate with our German counterparts to ensure they're informed of the delay at Checkpoint Delta." Her decision demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking that distinguished good commanders from great ones, finding solutions that addressed immediate problems without creating larger issues. The exercise continued to present challenges throughout the day. Communication difficulties caused by the storm forced several units to rely on alternative contact methods. Navigation became more complex as familiar landmarks disappeared in the rain and fog. Equipment failures tested the resourcefulness of individual units and the flexibility of the overall command structure. Through each crisis, Sarah maintained a calm presence in the command tent that seemed to anchor everyone else's efforts. Her responses to problems were quick but thoughtful, showing trust in her subordinates while maintaining overall strategic focus. The officers working directly with her began to relax, finding confidence in her steady leadership during stressful situations. Captain Hayes's unit encountered their most serious challenge of the day when they discovered a bridge had been damaged by the weather. The structure was passable but potentially dangerous, especially for their heavier vehicles. His report to command was concise but revealed the difficulty of the decision he faced. Command, Bravo 6. Bridge at grid reference. 823570 shows structural damage. I can get the personnel across safely, but I'm concerned about the vehicles. Requesting guidance. The request showed both his tactical awareness and his willingness to seek higher authority when faced with safety concerns. Sarah consulted with her engineering advisor and studied alternative routes before responding. The decision would affect not only Captain Hayes's unit, but also two other groups scheduled to use the same crossing. Bravo 6 Command. Send advanced personnel across on foot to establish security on the far side. Leave vehicles and proceed with primary mission. Recovery teams will retrieve equipment after weather clears. The order required Captain Hayes to abandon expensive equipment in favor of mission completion and personnel safety. It was exactly the kind of difficult decision that separated competent officers from exceptional ones, requiring the wisdom to know when materials could be sacrificed for more important objectives. Captain Hayes's response came without hesitation. Roger, Command. Bravo 6 proceeding on foot. Vehicles secured at current position. His immediate compliance demonstrated both his professional development since their initial confrontation and his trust in Sarah's judgment. The transformation in their working relationship was evident to everyone monitoring the radio traffic. As the day progressed, other units faced similar challenges that tested both individual leadership and overall coordination. Lieutenant Parker's group successfully navigated a complex urban environment despite communication blackouts. Major Rodriguez adapted his tactics when weather forced changes to planned air support. Each success built confidence in the command structure and Sarah's ability to guide the overall operation. The Allied forces presented additional coordination challenges that required diplomatic skills alongside military expertise. The German commander expressed concerns about delays affecting joint operations scheduled for the following day. Sarah handled these discussions with patience and professionalism, finding compromises that satisfied multiple national interests without compromising mission objectives. Colonel Martinez observed Sarah's performance throughout the crisis-filled day with growing admiration. He had seen many promising officers struggle when theoretical knowledge met practical challenges, but Sarah seemed to thrive under pressure. Her ability to process multiple complex situations simultaneously while maintaining strategic focus was remarkable for someone with relatively limited command experience. The evening briefing brought together all unit commanders to review the day's operations and plan for the next phase of the exercise. The atmosphere was markedly different from the hostile environment of their initial meeting. Officers who had been skeptical of Sarah's capabilities now participated in discussions with genuine respect for her leadership abilities. Captain Hayes presented his unit's status report with professional thoroughness, acknowledging both successes and areas for improvement. When he described the bridge situation, his comments reflected appreciation for the command decision that had prioritized mission completion over equipment preservation. The change in his attitude was subtle but unmistakable to everyone present. Sarah conducted the briefing with the same calm competence she had displayed throughout the day's operations. She acknowledged individual unit achievements while addressing systemic issues that needed correction. Her feedback was specific and constructive, showing that she had been paying attention to details even while managing the broader operation. Major Thompson raised concerns about equipment reliability that had plagued his unit throughout the day. Sarah listened carefully to his analysis and incorporated his suggestions into the following day's planning. The interaction showed her willingness to learn from experienced subordinates while maintaining overall responsibility for decisions. The discussion of lessons learned revealed the complexity of coordinating multiple units under adverse conditions. Communication protocols that worked perfectly in training environments proved inadequate when weather interfered with radio transmissions. Navigation techniques required modification when familiar landmarks became invisible. Equipment limitations became apparent under stress that couldn't be replicated in peacetime exercises. Sarah's handling of these discussions impressed even the most experienced officers present. She encouraged honest assessment of problems while maintaining focus on solutions rather than blame. Her approach created an environment where officers felt safe admitting mistakes, leading to more thorough analysis of systemic issues. The planning session for the following day required balancing multiple competing factors. Weather forecasts suggested continued challenging conditions. Allied forces had their own operational requirements that needed coordination. Equipment limitations discovered during the first day would affect tactical options. Personnel fatigue was becoming a factor that couldn't be ignored. Sarah worked through each issue methodically, incorporating input from her subordinates while maintaining decision-making authority. The process demonstrated advanced leadership skills that typically took years to develop. Her ability to synthesize complex information while considering multiple perspectives showed intellectual capabilities that complemented her command presence. As the briefing concluded, the officers began filing out with assignments for the next day. The conversations were focused and professional, showing engagement with the mission that hadn't been present during their initial meeting. The transformation in group dynamics was remarkable, shifting from hostile resistance to collaborative teamwork in less than 48 hours. Captain Hayes approached Sarah after the others had left, his demeanor much more relaxed than it had been previously. "Lieutenant Commander, I wanted to say that your decisions today were solid." The bridge situation particularly showed good judgment under pressure. His comment was offered as a genuine professional assessment, rather than grudging acknowledgement. Sarah accepted the compliment with grace while maintaining appropriate professional distance. "Thank you, Captain. Your field assessment of the bridge situation was exactly what I needed to make an informed decision. That's how effective teams work." Her response reinforced the collaborative nature of their success while acknowledging his contribution to the outcome. The conversation continued for several minutes, covering tactical details and coordination requirements for the following day. The discussion was entirely professional, focused on mission success rather than personal relationships, but it represented a complete transformation from their initial hostile encounter. Both officers had demonstrated the maturity to move beyond personal conflicts toward effective working relationships. As Sarah prepared for a few hours of rest before the next day's operations, she reflected on the lessons learned during her first real test as a commanding officer. Leadership in crisis situations required different skills than managing routine operations. The ability to remain calm under pressure was essential, but equally important was the wisdom to know when to trust subordinates' expertise and when to maintain central control. The weather forecast promised even greater challenges for the final day of the exercise, with the possibility of severe storms that could force major changes to operational plans. Sarah knew that the confidence she had built with her officers during the first 2 days would be crucial for maintaining unit cohesion if conditions deteriorated further. The success of the day had established her credibility as a field commander, but she understood that leadership was an ongoing process rather than a single achievement. Each decision, each interaction, each crisis would either build upon her growing reputation or undermine the foundation she had worked so hard to establish. The pressure was constant, but she was beginning to understand that pressure was simply another tool that effective leaders learned to use rather than something to be feared or avoided. The emergency call came at 0200 hours on the third day, cutting through the relative quiet of the command tent like a blade through silk. Sarah was immediately alert, her training taking over, before her conscious mind fully processed the urgency in the radio operator's voice. The storm that weather forecasters had predicted was arriving 12 hours ahead of schedule, bringing with it winds that exceeded safety parameters for most planned operations. "Command, this is Charlie. 7. We have a medical emergency at our current position. One soldier down with what appears to be appendicitis, requesting immediate medical evacuation." Lieutenant Peterson's voice carried the controlled urgency of an officer dealing with a serious situation while trying to maintain operational composure. His unit was positioned in one of the most remote areas of the exercise zone, making evacuation particularly challenging. Sarah was already moving toward the communications station before the message finished transmitting. The medical emergency transformed what had been a training exercise into a real-world crisis, where actual lives hung in the balance. Everything they had accomplished during the previous 2 days would be meaningless if they couldn't successfully rescue one of their own people under adverse conditions. Charlie 7, command. Understood. Stand by for evacuation instructions. Sarah's response was immediate and calm, but her mind was already racing through the complex logistics required to extract a medical casualty from hostile terrain during dangerous weather conditions. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away, and the approaching storm would make helicopter evacuation extremely risky. Major Thompson's voice came through the radio within seconds of Sarah's transmission. Command, Alpha 3. We're approximately 8 kilometers from Charlie 7's position. Request permission to alter course and provide assistance. His offer demonstrated the kind of initiative and mutual support that distinguished professional military units from mere collections of individual soldiers. Sarah consulted the situation map, calculating distances, terrain difficulties, and weather factors with the speed born of intensive training and practical experience. Major Thompson's unit could reach the emergency site faster than dedicated medical teams, but diverting them would leave a gap in the eastern operational zone that could compromise other units' safety. Alpha 3, Command. Permission granted for course alteration. Proceed to Charlie 7's position with medical personnel and evacuation equipment. Bravo 6, adjust your route to cover Alpha 3's assigned sector. Sarah's orders demonstrated the kind of rapid decision-making and resource allocation that separated competent commanders from exceptional ones. Captain Hayes' response came immediately, showing both his improved attitude and his professional competence. Bravo 6, Roger. Adjusting route to cover Eastern Sector. Estimated arrival at modified objectives in 4 hours. His willingness to accept additional responsibilities without question or complaint showed how much their working relationship had evolved since that first confrontational meeting. The storm's early arrival created cascading problems throughout the operational area. Wind speeds were approaching the safety limits for several planned activities, and visibility was decreasing to dangerous levels. Sarah found herself managing not just a medical emergency, but a complete reorganization of the exercise parameters to ensure everyone's safety. Colonel Martinez approached with updated weather reports that confirmed their worst fears. Lieutenant Commander, meteorology is predicting sustained winds of 40 knots with gusts up to 60. Visibility dropping to less than 100 meters in some areas. We're looking at conditions that exceed safety protocols for most operations. Sarah studied the weather data while simultaneously monitoring radio traffic from units across the operational area. The decision she faced was complex and critical. Continuing the exercise under these conditions risked additional casualties, but abandoning it would waste months of planning and significant resources. More importantly, it would deny valuable training opportunities that could save lives in real combat situations. All units command. Exercise operations are suspended effective immediately. Switch to emergency protocols and begin movement to designated shelter areas. Medical evacuation takes priority over all other activities. Sarah's decision was swift and decisive, prioritizing safety over training objectives without hesitation or second-guessing. The response from field units was immediate and professional. Officers who had been managing complex tactical scenarios suddenly shifted their focus to basic survival and mutual aid. The transformation from exercise to emergency was seamless, demonstrating the quality of training and leadership throughout the operation. Lieutenant Peterson's situation update painted a picture of increasing urgency. Patient condition is deteriorating. We need evacuation within the next 2 hours to prevent serious complications. His medical assessment was delivered with clinical detachment, but everyone monitoring the radio understood the implications of his words. Major Thompson's unit was pushing through increasingly difficult terrain to reach the emergency site. Command, Alpha 3, encountering significant obstacles due to weather conditions. Request updated navigation assistance and hazard information. His request showed both the challenges they were facing and their determination to reach their fellow soldiers despite the risks. Sarah coordinated with air traffic control to determine helicopter availability under the deteriorating conditions. The news was discouraging. Command, this is flight operations. All rotary wing aircraft are grounded due to weather conditions. Earliest possible takeoff time is 0800 hours, assuming conditions improve as forecast. The helicopter situation meant that ground evacuation was the only option, requiring a 40-mile journey over difficult terrain in dangerous weather conditions. Sarah began calculating routes and logistics while simultaneously coordinating with civilian medical authorities to ensure hospital readiness for their arrival. Captain Hayes' unit reached their modified objective ahead of schedule despite the challenging conditions. Command, Bravo 6. Eastern Sector secured, standing by to provide additional support if needed. His offer of assistance demonstrated both competence and the kind of mutual support that Sarah had been working to build throughout the operation. The next several hours tested every aspect of Sarah's leadership abilities. She found herself managing multiple crises simultaneously while maintaining communication with higher headquarters and civilian authorities. The complexity was overwhelming, but her training and natural abilities allowed her to process multiple streams of information while making rapid decisions. Major Thompson's rescue team finally reached Lieutenant Peterson's position after a grueling cross-country movement through increasingly hostile weather. Command, Alpha 3. We have reached Charlie 7. Medical personnel are evaluating the patient, preparing for ground evacuation via the most secure route available. The medical evaluation confirmed the severity of the situation. Command, this is Sergeant Rodriguez, medic with Alpha 3. Patient shows classic symptoms of acute appendicitis with possible complications. Immediate surgical intervention required. Recommend fastest possible evacuation to nearest trauma facility. Sarah had anticipated this assessment and already had ground transportation standing by at the edge of the exercise area. Alpha 3 Command. Ground ambulance positioned at grid reference 915738. Estimated travel time to rendezvous point is 90 minutes under current conditions. Proceed immediately. The evacuation convoy faced every possible challenge that weather and terrain could provide. Washed-out roads forced detours through unfamiliar areas. Limited visibility made navigation dangerous and slow. Mechanical problems with vehicles added additional stress to an already complex situation. Throughout it all, Sarah maintained constant communication with the rescue teams while coordinating with medical facilities and higher command authorities. Colonel Martinez observed Sarah's performance during this crisis with professional admiration. Lieutenant Commander, I've seen senior officers with decades of experience struggle with situations like this. Your coordination and decision-making have been exemplary under the most challenging possible circumstances. Sarah acknowledged the compliment while maintaining focus on the ongoing situation. Thank you, Colonel, but we're not finished yet. Success will be measured by getting our soldier to medical care safely, not by how well we manage the crisis. Her response showed both appropriate humility and unwavering focus on mission objectives rather than personal recognition. The radio crackled with an update from Major Thompson. Command, Alpha 3. Patient loaded into ambulance and en route to hospital. Estimated arrival time at medical facility is 45 minutes. Medical personnel report patient condition is stable but critical. The successful handoff to civilian medical authorities marked a crucial milestone in the crisis, but Sarah knew that their responsibilities weren't finished until every soldier was safely accounted for, and the exercise area was properly secured. The storm was still raging, and several units remained in potentially dangerous positions. Captain Hayes volunteered his unit for the most hazardous mission remaining. Command, Bravo 6, request permission to conduct final sweep of the northern sector to ensure all personnel have reached shelter areas. We have the equipment and experience necessary for this mission. His offer demonstrated both courage and the complete transformation in his attitude towards Sarah's leadership. Sarah considered the request carefully, balancing the need for thorough accountability against the risks involved in sending anyone out in the continuing storm. Bravo 6. Command. Permission granted with modified parameters. Conduct radio check with all units first. Physical verification only if radio contact cannot be established. The systematic accountability process revealed that all units had successfully reached their assigned shelter areas and that no additional personnel were missing or in immediate danger. The news brought considerable relief to everyone in the command tent, but Sarah knew that their responsibilities extended beyond just locating people. The successful resolution of the medical emergency and storm crisis earned Sarah recognition that extended far beyond the immediate participants in the exercise. Word of her performance under pressure spread through military networks, establishing her reputation as a commander who could be trusted with difficult assignments and challenging responsibilities.
As the storm finally began to subside, Sarah conducted a comprehensive after-action review of the crisis response.
The analysis revealed both successes and areas for improvement, providing valuable lessons for future operations. Her willingness to examine mistakes alongside achievements demonstrated the kind of intellectual honesty that distinguished great leaders. The medical emergency had a happy ending when hospital reports confirmed successful surgery and full recovery prospects for the affected soldier. The news brought celebration throughout the units involved in the rescue operation, reinforcing the bonds that had been formed through shared adversity and successful teamwork. Captain Hayes approached Sarah during the post-crisis cleanup with an expression of genuine respect. Lieutenant Commander, I owe you an apology that goes beyond what I said after our first meeting. Watching you handle this crisis has shown me what real leadership looks like. I was wrong about you, and I'm glad you proved me wrong. Sarah accepted his words graciously while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. Captain, the real test of leadership isn't how well someone handles a briefing room confrontation. It's how they perform when lives are on the line and there's no time for personal agendas. Today showed me that this command has exactly the kind of officers it needs for any mission. The conversation between Sarah and Captain Hayes represented more than just personal reconciliation. It symbolized the transformation of an entire command structure from skeptical resistance to genuine teamwork. The crisis had revealed everyone's true character, and the results exceeded what anyone could have hoped for during those initial tense moments in the briefing room. 6 months later, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stood before a room filled with some of the military's most senior officers, delivering the keynote address at the annual Leadership Excellence Conference. The invitation to speak at such a prestigious event was unprecedented for someone of her rank, but her handling of what had become known as the Storm exercise had elevated her profile throughout the entire military establishment. The audience included generals, admirals, and senior civilian defense officials who had come to hear firsthand about the leadership principles that had transformed a potentially disastrous training exercise into a textbook example of crisis management. Sarah's presentation focused not on her own actions, but on the collective performance of every officer and soldier who had contributed to the mission's success. In the front row sat Captain Robert Hayes, now serving as Sarah's executive officer at their new assignment. The transformation in their relationship had become legendary throughout military circles, cited in leadership courses as an example of how professional growth could overcome initial personality conflicts. His presence at the conference represented both personal support and institutional recognition of their successful partnership. Sarah's presentation began with a detailed analysis of the communication breakdowns that had complicated the medical evacuation. Leadership under pressure isn't about making perfect decisions, she explained to the attentive audience. It's about making the best decisions possible with available information, then adapting quickly when circumstances change. The conference attendees were particularly interested in her discussion of how she had managed the interpersonal dynamics within her command during the crisis. Military effectiveness depends on trust between commanders and subordinates, Sarah continued. That trust can't be demanded or assumed. It must be earned through consistent demonstration of competence, integrity, and commitment to mission success over personal advancement. Major Thompson, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, had submitted a detailed case study of the exercise for inclusion in military leadership curricula. His analysis focused on the decision-making processes that had enabled rapid response to multiple simultaneous crises. The study had become required reading at several military academies, ensuring that future officers would benefit from the lessons learned. Sarah's discussion of gender-related challenges drew particular attention from the mixed audience. The question isn't whether female officers face additional scrutiny or different expectations, she said frankly. The question is how we respond to those challenges. Excellence speaks louder than any argument, and competence ultimately overcomes prejudice more effectively than confrontation. The response from the audience was overwhelmingly positive, with questions that revealed genuine interest in applying her methods to other situations. A Marine general asked about scaling her communication techniques to larger operations. An Air Force colonel inquired about adapting her crisis management protocols to different operational environments. Each question demonstrated the broader applicability of the principles she had developed. Colonel Martinez, now serving as Sarah's mentor in her new role as operations director for a major training command, observed the presentation with pride. He had submitted the initial nomination that brought Sarah to the conference organizers' attention. Watching her field complex questions from senior officers with the same calm competence she had shown during the storm crisis confirmed his assessment of her exceptional potential. The private discussions that followed Sarah's presentation revealed the extent to which her reputation had grown throughout the military establishment. Senior officers who had never met her personally expressed interest in having her assigned to their commands. Her combination of tactical competence, crisis management ability, and interpersonal skills represented exactly the kind of leadership the military needed for future challenges. Captain Hayes found himself frequently asked about his experience working under Sarah's command. His responses invariably focused on her professional abilities rather than their initial conflicts. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has the rare ability to bring out the best performance from everyone around her, he would explain. She sets high standards and provides the support necessary to achieve them. The medical evacuation that had triggered the crisis had indeed saved a life, with the affected soldier making a complete recovery and returning to active duty within 6 weeks. His experience had led to revisions in exercise medical protocols and improvements in emergency response procedures that would benefit countless future operations. The positive outcome validated every difficult decision made during those chaotic hours. Sarah's new assignment involved developing training programs for military officers transitioning to command positions. The role allowed her to share the lessons learned during the storm exercise with hundreds of future leaders, multiplying the impact of her experience exponentially. Her curricula emphasized practical crisis management alongside traditional military tactics. The training programs Sarah developed became models for similar efforts throughout the military. Her emphasis on realistic scenarios and interpersonal challenges prepared officers for the complex human dynamics they would encounter in actual command positions. The success rates of graduates from her programs exceeded those of traditional leadership courses by significant margins. Lieutenant Parker, now a captain himself, often cited Sarah's example when discussing leadership with his own subordinates. The lessons he learned during the exercise influenced his approach to command challenges throughout his career. His success as a commander demonstrated the lasting impact of witnessing effective leadership under pressure. The Storm exercise had also led to significant improvements in inter-service coordination and emergency response protocols. The successful cooperation between different military units and civilian authorities became a template for future joint operations. These procedural improvements enhanced readiness for both training exercises and actual emergency responses. Sarah's influence extended beyond immediate military circles when she was invited to speak at civilian leadership conferences. Corporate executives and government officials found that the principles she articulated applied equally well to business crises and administrative challenges. Her presentations emphasized the universal nature of effective leadership regardless of organizational context. The relationship between Sarah and her former subordinates evolved into genuine mutual respect based on shared experience and proven competence. Captain Hayes often remarked that working under Sarah's command had made him a better officer and leader. His willingness to acknowledge her superior abilities demonstrated the kind of professional maturity that distinguished career military officers. Annual reunions of the exercise participants became informal networking events where officers shared career updates and continued learning from each other's experiences. The bonds formed during those challenging days created a professional network that provided mutual support throughout their careers. These relationships often proved more valuable than formal mentoring programs. Sarah's approach to leadership development emphasized the importance of learning from both successes and failures. Her post-exercise analysis had identified several areas where different decisions might have produced better outcomes. This intellectual honesty about imperfection made her teaching more credible and her methods more effective. The recognition Sarah received included several prestigious military awards, but she consistently emphasized that the real success belonged to everyone who had contributed to the mission. Her refusal to claim individual credit for collective achievements enhanced her reputation and demonstrated the servant leadership philosophy that guided her command style. Years later, when Sarah had achieved flag rank and commanded major installations, military historians would trace her exceptional career back to those crucial moments in a rain-soaked command tent. The Storm exercise became a defining event that shaped not only her own development, but also influenced military leadership development for an entire generation. The lesson that resonated most strongly from Sarah's experience was that true authority comes not from rank or position, but from demonstrated competence under pressure. Her famous declaration that, "Everyone here answers to me," had been proven correct not because of military hierarchy, but because she had earned the right to lead through her actions when it mattered most. The transformation of Captain Hayes from skeptical opponent to loyal subordinate became a case study in professional development and conflict resolution. Military academies used their story to teach future officers about the importance of maintaining open minds and adapting to new leadership styles, regardless of personal preconceptions. Sarah's legacy extended far beyond her individual achievements to encompass the hundreds of officers she mentored and influenced throughout her career. Many of them would go on to command positions where they applied the lessons learned from watching her handle crisis with competence and grace. The multiplication of effective leadership through mentoring and example created lasting positive change throughout the military establishment. The storm that had threatened to disrupt a routine training exercise had instead created an opportunity for exceptional leadership to emerge and flourish. Sarah's response to those challenges had proven that effective command was about much more than giving orders. It required wisdom, courage, adaptability, and above all, an unwavering commitment to the welfare of those entrusted to her care. The final validation of Sarah's leadership came not from awards or promotions, but from the success and satisfaction of the officers who served under her command. Their willingness to request assignments to her units and their improved performance under her leadership provided the most meaningful measure of her impact. In military terms, there could be no higher compliment than the trust and respect of professional peers. The briefing room where it all began was eventually renamed in honor of the exercise and the leadership lessons it produced. A plaque near the entrance reminded visitors that true authority must be earned rather than assumed, and that the best leaders are those who inspire others to exceed their own expectations. The simple message captured the essence of what had transpired during those challenging days when a young commander proved herself worthy of the trust placed in her.